Hey HTDA and welcome to Spellforce Conquest of Eo. Although this is technically a turn-based strategy game, it kind of feels like you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, but with armies. It has classes for your main character, quite a bit of story, lots of quests, but also a very interesting layer of strategic combat on top of that. Makes for a very interesting game, but it can be easy to get a bit lost at first. So let me walk you through the early stages of the game. First of all, you'll need to select your class, or archetype as the game calls it. Each of the three default types are solid and interesting to play, but you'll probably want to start out with Alchemist or Artificer, as they're a little bit more all-round compared to the Necromancer. As a side note, I will be making some more specific guides on these classes, so don't forget to subscribe if you're interested in those. If you're making your own custom mage, you can pretty much pick whatever you like, but if you want to give yourself an edge, I recommend picking the same type of magic for both your primary and secondary school. This just means you'll guarantee yourself a lot of synergy at a trade-off of getting a bit less variety in your spells and skills. You should also definitely be starting out in the Golden Fields for your first and possibly second playthrough. Not necessarily because the zone is easy, as that is largely determined by the difficulty setting you pick, but this area does provide you with a bit more options and flexibility than the alternatives, so it just makes for a very nice area to kind of get to know the game and kind of test out things that you're doing for yourself. The difficulties kind of speak for themselves, but if you're an experienced gamer, you'll probably be fine starting out unbalanced. This does provide you with the best experience, I think, and it will help you avoid developing bad habits that don't work on higher difficulties and which you'll then have to unlearn again. Of course, if you're a more casual player, then Explorer or Story Mode is just fine, but you probably won't need this strategy guide to begin with. Once you get into the game, you want to find the Master's Tower, but before you do that, I suggest you toggle on all the different overviews that you can get. So you have the location incomes, which show you where you can get certain types of income across the map. You have the harvestable locations, which are very useful to see where you can get some additional items, and turning on the hex grid just makes it a lot more convenient to know where you can move, how many steps something is away, etc, etc. So that's just a general good habit to have these on all the time, so you know what's going on across the map. Go into the tower, and if you want, do the combat tutorial. You don't get any rewards for it, but it does a good job at explaining the basics. I will give you some combat tips in a moment, but for now just continue on. Once you have your tower, you'll be able to see what falls into your territory. You'll be able to expand this later on, but for now it is important that you focus on your main quests. You can tell what your main quest is by the crown icon showing next to its target. In this case, you'll need to capture a goblin camp. Events can have different outcomes, so it's a good habit to save before you start an event and reload if you get an outcome you don't like, or start a fight you can't win. In this example of the goblin event, you can either just have the goblins flee or fight them. If you let them flee, you get a free shaman unit. If you fight them, you get a whole bunch of golden items along with some combat experience for your units. Before you end your turn, start construction of a building in your tower. This should be a room that matches your class, so a smithy if you're an artificer, an alchemy lab if you're an alchemist, or a crypt if you are a necromancer. On your second turn, you'll be able to start research on new spells. Your options will vary depending on your class, but generally speaking, cheap combat spells are a good place to start. However, you will need to summon a wisp soon for your main quest, so start there. Reminder, you'll also need to prepare spells before you can actually cast them. You should also consider crafting items if your class allows that, but try to avoid wasting resources on items that aren't much use to you. For example, making glyphs that turn your units into herbalists isn't really useful unless you actually plan to use those units to harvest plants a lot. When it comes to combat, do not touch the auto-resolve button, unless it is a very easy fight and you don't mind it if your units take a bit of extra damage. This holds especially in the beginning of the game. In most cases you can do much better when doing the fights manually, so use this at your own risk. The combat screen does give you a good overview of what to expect in terms of resistance, so take note of any modifiers that might apply and the types of units your enemy will bring to the table. Once you are in combat, try to keep your melee units at least one space apart to make it harder for enemies to flank them and to use attacks that hit multiple enemies at the same time. Also, don't rush forward, but try to let the enemy come to you by moving forward very slowly and putting your units on guard. Once you engage, always try to use your ranged units first, your melee units second, and your healer last. This will allow your ranged units to do some initial damage and potentially apply status effects before the melee runs in to finish the enemy off. It will also allow your healer to recover the damage from any retaliation attacks your units have suffered. There is one exception to this order, and that is at the end of combat. Make sure that you use any heals you have left before you take out the last unit, because that's just free healing right there. Keep in mind that once you start attacking, your units will use all their actions on that, so there is no switching targets or moving afterwards. Taking out units should have priority, so focus fire on single units if you can. If you win enough battles, your units will gain experience. Your upgrade options are picked randomly, so you'll need to be picking based on your circumstances, but there are some priorities to consider. Your melee units will take most of the damage, so improving their daily healing is very strong, and lacking that, improving their armor or resistance can be very useful as well. For your ranged units, improving their damage is an obvious pick, and for your healers, improving their focus so they can cast more spells is extremely powerful. Keep following the main quest until you get your first apprentice unit. These are the core of your army. Not only are they very powerful units, they will also allow you to have 5 units in a stack rather than just 4, so any stack with an apprentice will have a power advantage just because of that. Your apprentice will also be able to build a lodge that will expand your territory. Try building it near resources or buildings that will allow you to produce stronger units as soon as possible, but don't hesitate to move it elsewhere if you find a better spot later on. Around the same time, you should also have access to the All-Fire Flow. This allows you to fine-tune what resources you want to prioritize. Initially, it can be very useful to prioritize proficiency, because at Mastery level 10, your tower will expand its influence range, expanding your territory. Research will continue to be very important in early game as well, so this should be your second priority. Mana is always useful, but you'll often be able to get that from other sources as well, so it's not a high priority. Once you grow the power of your tower, you will also get a quest to find your second apprentice. Since this one won't actually come with its own army, make sure you produce a new stack of units in advance, so you can put your apprentice to good use straight away. That stack should typically have 2 melee units, 1 range unit, and 1 healer. Once you have your second apprentice and about 3 stacks running around the map, you are well on your way into the mid-game. Keep exploring and doing quests, upgrading your tower and expanding your territory. It's very useful to find the larger cities and do their quests, as they will often give you access to rooms you can build that allow you to recruit units from within your own tower. This will ensure you don't have to rely too much on the buildings around the map for that. Also, don't forget that you can move your tower. Do that as soon as your starting resources start running out, and make sure you keep your income steady and stable. This should allow you to not have too much issues building up an army and taking out whatever the enemy throws at you. This covers pretty much everything in the early game. If you feel anything is missing or you have any questions about the game that I didn't cover in this guide, let me know in the comments below and I'll be happy to help out where I can. Don't forget to like the video if you found it useful, and I hope to catch you in the next one.